Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of She Rising. So today I'm so excited to do our second podcast. I remember that in our last podcast we talked about what is feminism, what is patriarchy, and before talking about today's podcast, I'm gonna introduce our dear Erin, who is our vice president of She Rising. Yay!
Hi! So I'm really happy to be a part of this. But before we kind of get into the podcast, I just want to say that we're getting the majority of our research and our quotes and everything from the book called In Their Time. The author is called Legates. And so that's where we're going to be drawing from most of our resources today.
Yeah, I'm so excited today. To talk more about patriarchy, which is still ongoing institutions, which gives us more insights about it. So I remember that last time we talked about a little bit referring that because of patriarchy, women have faced more economical exploitation, sexual exploitation, political exploitation, and today we're gonna cover most deep into it. Yeah. So, what do you think the main constraints of patriarchy, the aspects? What are the driving force that lead into the constraints of patriarchy?
So I would say that, and as Legates puts it, there are 4 main constraints that come with patriarchy for women, and that includes being excluded from education, like you mentioned, the economic exploitation, sexual exploitation, like you mentioned, and being disregarded in terms of political policy and decision making on a grand governmental scale.
Yeah, that are the main 4 aspects of our life when you really think about it, as a human rights, right? Political, economical, social, sexual. Yeah,
it's every aspect of the public sphere, basically women have been relegated to the private sphere, the domestic side of life for a very long time, and so anything that had to do with the public sphere, so like I said, policy, education, and also cultural elements as well, they're marginalized from that, away from the center.
Yeah. So I was just thinking maybe how we can get deep into it. Let's talk about the first aspect, which is the political. So how do you see into that, the political aspects? How do women came so far? What were the historical evidences that we have? Women were exploited but not given political rights.
Yeah, so as early as we can see, specifically I guess people refer mostly to ancient Greek culture as very, very fundamental in terms of the history of Western expectations and such. So from the beginning, in terms of this ancient Greek culture, women were customarily prohibited from participating in politics. Specifically in ancient Athens, the Acropolis, which was the political heart of the city, most women, especially if they were of respectable status or noble status, they actually weren't even allowed to be in that area of the city at all. They weren't allowed to be in the Acropolis, except for designated public festivals. But other than that, they were physically actually kept out of the public sphere.
It's interesting that, the idea of democracy, I remember that it's coming from the Greek Roman culture, or maybe their political ideology was democracy, and the idea of democracy was not included women. So it's kind of crazy to think about the rule of people, where people in that category, women were not considered to be a human. I think it's less worth of human, I guess.
Exactly. Even in that original form of democracy, like you were saying, 3/4 of the population weren't even included in this, people who are allowed to rule themselves. So if you were not of legal age, male, and free and unenslaved, specifically in Athens, and if you weren't of Athenian, parentage, like you simply weren't considered a person, and you weren't able to participate. So that applies to women, but it also applies to enslaved peoples. It also applies to people who weren't Athenian. Like there was a ton of ways to be excluded from democracy. I just think that's pretty ironic.
Yeah, it's really crazy when you think about that. And I remember like when the Greek philosopher Aristotle like literally mentioned man as a political animal.
Yeah.
But not woman.
No.
And
he did that on purpose too. Like it was specifically men. He didn't mean human.
He didn't mean human.
No, that's like it's kind of like a myth or a rewriting that they say that they just said man because man was like the word for all of humankind. No, they actually meant males. Like they actually meant male humans were those that were human, not the other way around.
It's so sad and crazy when you think about that. But that totally makes sense. That is totally and proper evidence where we can provide that we are not bragging.
Yeah.
We are telling literally the evidence that in our political agendas, and still it's ongoing. Like when we think about present world, in today's world, the woman representative in the global political aspect, like there's only like less than 20 or 30%. I'm not sure, but it's still a minority.
It's quite a small minority, and considering that, what is it, like 51 or 52% of the world's population are women? So it's half, but it's also a little more than half. And the representation in politics, globally speaking, is so minuscule.
And still we believe with the notion that women have rights in this present modern world, but there is need of lot of fights in today's world. So there we go, like with the aspect of political when compared to the past and to present. We have fights so far, but there's
a lot to go, so much to go. And also it's not far to mention that when there is, the exception of a woman holding political power, there are so many parts of her personal life that are kind of on display for her to perform, because like a female politician, they might be questioned about like their menstruation, they might be questioned about their hormones, they might be questioned about like their ability to parent their children if they have any. And so there's so much more pressure on like the few that actually do get into power, because they're willing to rip it away for any moral transgression that a woman might have.
It's so true, because like when we look into past historical evidences, or women were always put into hold because of uterus. Because they have uterus, they may have emotional hormone balances which cause them to be like disruptive or distress or madness.
Hysterical. That's what they call it.
Yeah, hysterical. Exactly. So, and it's still ongoing where women's representation is still low, and when these are capitalized, these are monopolized, and these are the aspects where women were denied from the rights that they really like consider from human rights. So we need to really think about it too. So talking about like, we can see in history that men have monopolized philosophy, literature, and language, which has resulted with like the norm where men are the norm and women are marginalized. And to the extent that women are considered at all, they were considered as deviants or subjects deserving like special consideration, quoted. So men have this typically been equated with reason and intellect, and self-control, power, strength, but women have been considered inferior at all of these categories. And do you think that this is ongoing and this is something that is still connected to why women, like one of the constraints of a patriarchy that connected earlier?
Absolutely. Like, you can see this in the fields of jobs that we even have associated with men and women respectively. Fields like psychology, for example, can come to the top of my head. Originally male-dominated fields, they were highly, highly respected, when there was a lot of like male doctors or male scholars participating in these. And as soon as women entered these workforce and they started taking part of these like careers, women start becoming interested in psychology and they become psychologists. They start doing their own research, and as soon as they do, the value of that actual job field drops significantly. It becomes like significantly less valued culturally speaking. There are stereotypes associated with it, that it's easy work, or that it's not something of like value, of like hard evidence or like hard science, and that was coming from a place of prestige and coming from a place of being highly culturally valued, until women started participating. And you can see this like to this day presently with like the field of psychology, for example. Previously there used to be midwives, for example, who were responsible for like handling gynecology and everything related to birthing children and women's reproductive health. It was never considered to be a science until men became involved in the field, and then it was considered a science. And often along the time they also brought with them like Western medicine and Western practices as well. And they started calling, medicines, especially naturalistic and herbal medicines that women had been using for hundreds, if not thousands of years to that point, they start calling it more similar to witchcraft, and they start kind of like, what I mean? Disregarding it, marginalizing it. But like I said, herbal medicine in the beginning, when it was studied by men in the beginning of Western science, was considered highly prestigious, highly scientific, highly important, and taken very seriously, until men started leaning more towards Western medicine and women continued in their herbalistic and naturalistic traditions. Then it was considered superstitious, and it was considered alternative to what men are doing.
It's crazy that, see, when you're telling about that, I was just thinking about like the branding of Western medicine, that men are involved, you are safe. It's just, so I just want to like let everyone in this audience that we are never man haters. because you might often see, we are just talking honestly and also with the historical, based on social scientist evidences, the scholarly evidences, and this is not completely within our thoughts. These are completely based on evidences. Just want to let you all know that these are historical evidences that is not connected with our thoughts.
This isn't our personal bias.
It's
just unfortunate and sad truths.
So we are never man haters, but we want to bring.
I think our goal of like our podcast and our organization, everything that we're doing, our goal is to help along like changing the way that this world works, and the way that it works currently is under the patriarchal system, which is damaging to women, of course, but it's also extremely damaging to men. And we see, I think it's coming out a lot more, like research about men's mental health and men's loneliness crisis, men's relationships with their friends and family. Men's higher suicide rate than women. This is all true. And so it's not just with the intent to point out women's marginalization, but also to dismantle like patriarchal notions that also harm men and women both. And non-binary people as well, excluding other genders outside of the binary.
Yes, that's very important. And also like we definitely gonna cover all these topics like in coming podcast. So
we have to break it up a little at a time.
Okay. So we're talking about the political thing, but then even this is happening, I think these are happening in early 80s or in the Middle Ages. No, I'm not sure like at what time period it actually is.
So it was around after the 12th century actually. Before the 12th century, like women were highly educated. It was very like it was very normal for at least like, you know, women of a higher economic status to be trained in like religious houses, like nunneries, and it was quite an advantage to be like literate and be like kind of aware of other like philosophies, be schooled, have education. It was very, very common and even expected for women before the 12th century. But after the 12th century, education became more of a monopoly for male,
yeah.
and that kind of continued. It got very much stronger after the 12th century, and it continued on all the way just until the last 100 years or so, when women were finally admitted into universities.
Yeah.
So it's been ongoing for hundreds of years that women weren't allowed to receive higher education just until around roughly the 1900s. When they used to be, women were associated with like religious learning, literacy, philosophy. It used to be something that was considered feminine before.
Feminine, oh yeah. And I think and women were only able to study in support of the male in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, they cannot, especially like noble women during that time, they were only able to access education with only help of their supportive brothers or supportive father, but not by their own or any kinds of means.
Exactly. They had no autonomy to choose education for themselves. They had to be granted permission to receive education, and if not, they would be trained in the ways of like domestic service, and they would, you know, learn other things, but it wouldn't be education per se. It would be more house training.
Yeah, you know what, when we discussed about this, suddenly recently I'm just watching Anne with an E series.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. So in that, I think maybe like for the audience, but a little example with that, because in that particular series I have seen that women during that time were not encouraged to learn, especially women like who are in higher prestige families, like the who were under the queen, especially like the working women or working where they were forced to working but not for education, but the people who had money, people who had privileged, especially in those households, women were kept away from education, and it was more of a status. Like women were able to like learn keyboard instruments, or maybe they can complete up to high school, but not more than that. So it's interesting.
And even for especially, and this goes on very, very recently, like until for poorer families, I believe like 6th grade or so, many girls and women were like removed from education after 6th grade, because basically school up until that point trained them how to take orders. You know, the way that like, you know, all socialization works for children. They're trained in the first place to learn how to respond to authority and behave, and learn basic fundamental things like their multiplication tables, addition, you know, things that will help them in their life that they need to know, but no higher education past 6th grade. And it's at that point, you know, when you become that age, that's when you would start helping around your house with your family. Well, you would always be doing that, to be honest, but that's when it would become your primary role. And then you'd be married soon after and start taking care of somebody else's household.
It's like developing girls for just to go into the system, with the institution where they don't have talent to learn, they don't have, like, knowledge is power. So they don't want women to attain knowledge, so that if women attain knowledge, they get spoiled. Or the idea that women will be deviant. Deviant,
or they could become like there's stereotypes of them being like pompous, you know, like, oh, like she thinks she's the smartest one in the room because she's been an educated woman. So they're scared of them stepping out of line, I would say.
Or another example is that if women are educated, they won't go into marriage system, marriage institution. Will be deviant. They have more knowledge, more problems for the society.
And that actually, like what we were talking about, women being kind of relegated to the private sphere, like rather than the public sphere, it has everything to do with like like you said, like child rearing and
Yeah.
reproduction and everything. So like originally, when they were like leaving school after the 6th grade, they would become married, and you know, as soon as they were able to, they would start giving birth and having children and raising them. But at the same time, like there are real problems that happen in the world when there are economic difficulties, and a husband wasn't able to make up the majority of his income for his family. The wife would still need to supplement, so she would go outside of the home to work, and all of the child care responsibilities would still be hers.
Yeah.
So she ended up, creating or having like a double burden. So expecting to contribute to the material well-being, do whatever you need to do to make sure that you're having enough income to supplement your husband's work as well. But also, they would also need to be producing essentials at home. They were making their own clothes for them and their children and their husbands. They were creating medicine. They were cooking the food. They were even making soap and candles before they were like widely available to be sold in stores. So aside of raising the children and doing actual manual work outside of the home, they were also doing domestic work by producing goods within the home as well. And it just kind of shows that they lacked economic opportunity. They didn't have a choice in anything that they did.
It's so sad. It's really sad that based on situation that they're forced into do more labor. It's kind of,
especially if you include, like I said, like child rearing, like
yeah.
A woman, even in this day of time, but you know, a little farther back in history as well, for sure, like the child rearing is 100% your responsibility, and everything else you do is secondary to your your child rearing. But you have a lot of other responsibilities as well as a wife and as a caretaker, for your parents, for your husband, and for your children as well. And like the highlight of all of this is like historically, all throughout time, when women were to leave the home to help substitute their husband's income, they would always be paid 1/3 to 1/2 less, as like any man's equal pay. So even when they were doing all of this triple, double, extra work to supplement their family, they weren't even gaining much from it because they had such a huge like gap in the amount that they were able to receive.
This reminds me of like present day.
Still true.
It's because we can see that in current system it's like more of a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. job. During that time, if it's a working woman and she has like 2 children, and how's she gonna manage all that? She need to balance with the work, she need to find time with children, and also she's expected to do these both in this present day. So it's just challenging, especially in the case of single mothers.
Yes, especially though, even women with or without husbands, their careers in the corporate world and such, they tend to advance a lot slower than men's do. And that's because if they are married and they do have children, if the child is sick, one of them needs to stay home with the child, and it's always going to be the mother. It's likely always the mother.
It's true.
So their careers advance more slowly because even when they are working in the working world and they're making their career, they're climbing the corporate ladder, whatever they have to do, they still their primary responsibility is still child rearing to this day, making sure if your child is sick, you're picking them up from school, you're taking them home to like cook for them, make soup for them, take care of them while they're ill. And if you need to if you don't have a babysitter, if you don't have daycare, one of you needs to stay home from your job. And during your pregnancy, one of you needs to stay home. Your career, you may be missing promotions, you may be missing potential opportunities for almost a year or longer if you're on maternity leave, for a year after your pregnancy as well. So somebody's career is being stalled.
And at the same time, like in particular these days, these institutions should be flexible enough.
And some of them are, but it's not on it's not on a broad institutional level. It's more down to each organization. There's no there's not very much regulation as to how
there should be more work needed to be done. Especially like it's not always maternal, it's need to be paternal as well. There is more
like paid paternal leave. Why don't we have that? Because sure, a woman might receive some pay. It's not even their full pay though when they go on maternity leave. So they're at home making less than they usually do. staying up like 24, 22 hours of the day with like a crying infant who you need to like feed and coddle. And this is after you've undergone a very severe physical trauma that you will need to recover from. You may even need to be in bed rest. And where is your spouse or your partner who's supposed to make your life easier? They're at work. But they should be on paid paternal leave to help take care of you because you've been injured, first of all. And also you're doing so much extra labor within the house that you were doing before. And also you're not even being paid the same amount for it. And you're getting way less sleep.
It's affecting economical, career, no doubt. Economical, even like for like body autonomy, like changes that she goes through, psychological effects,
psychological, hormonal, biological, everything changes. I actually read a lot about that because it kind of scares me, I'm not gonna lie. Some of the things that I'm reading is there is a need for more institution, like the companies or any institutions, whether it is like universities or whether it is like corporate institutions, whatever job it is, there should be a law to enforce these kind of things. I was just talking to somebody actually. She went to the same university as I did. I believe she graduated many years ago. And she had a child and she was in part-time university. And she had no childcare. She was not allowed to attend her university class because she had a child. The professor told her that it would be too challenging for her. So it stalled her education completely because she wasn't able to get the credentials that she needed. Because she had a child at home.
Oh my god.
That was insane. That was a crazy story to hear firsthand.
Yeah. Maybe dig deep into that. Maybe we'll go more into these stories.
Moving on.
Now, talking about sexuality and fertility,
we were just talking about reproductive rights and health.
And so I think that is a fundamental aspect of patriarchy. Like, women are held based on that. And it has been expressed through a double standard. Like even in the earliest historical records, like under ancient Germanic law, a man was not legally capable of committing adultery against his wife, but he could only be punished for violating the property of another man, but his wife could be put to death for the same offense.
Exactly. So a man could be charged not for adultery, but for having sex with somebody else's wife who was somebody else's property. And that's violating the property laws. It's not violating her rights as a person, though. And if a wife were to commit adultery, she would be sentenced to death.
My god.
Yeah.
So I think this part of control of sexuality in women's vulnerability to male violence, right? Which
something that we hear all of the time.
Which ranges from sexual abuse, like wife beating, especially rape, to culturally enforced heterosexuality. So I think wife killing before in the late 17th century was not yet considered like it's something as offensive, or it's like it's bad, or it's a sin in their terms, or like enough to like merit attention, or maybe like for cases like which is unusual except the case of unusual brutality, they won't consider these kind of cases to be like bad or against the law.
So all of these things, like you said, like sexual abuse, wife beating, rape, and like culturally enforced heterosexuality, all of these things were totally considered normal and acceptable unless there was extreme circumstances. Unless it was a little bit too insane. But also that was subjective. So there was an example that was in the court cases, and so the court basically had a case where a man had whipped his wife. And apparently, like, he admitted this, he testified to this in the court, and the court didn't really care because it wasn't considered it wasn't considered abhorrent enough to satisfy the criteria of her life being put in danger. So she was not allowed to divorce her husband, because it was in this time where women weren't granted like the right to divorce unless her life was in direct danger or her health was in direct danger. And so basically your husband could beat you up as much as he wanted, so long as he could prove that you weren't going to die from it.
Oh my god.
And it could be as regular.
Look at the situation. Look at the situation.
Yeah. And then furthermore, like even in Canadian court cases in the 19th century, so even 200 years later, there was just, it's full of cases of women that were like completely brutalized by their husbands. They had been strangled, they had been beaten with the handles of broomsticks, scalded with boiling water, and threatened with guns, generally kicked and punched and beat up in that way. And nonetheless, they were not allowed to leave their husbands. Their husbands were acquitted. They were never charged with any criminal violence because they couldn't prove that their life had been in danger. Like someone's holding a gun to your head and they're like, but I didn't pull the trigger though.
Yeah, oh my god. That's insane. Like this happened like after 200 years.
And
that's crazy.
Like, and still to this day, like obviously now it's like illegal, you know, for domestic abuse and battery and everything, but it can be so difficult to prove, and with the stigma that comes along with it, there's sometimes so little that somebody can do who's in a situation like that. So like how much has really changed?
It's really complicated.
In terms of policy, there's been changes for sure, but like culturally speaking,
and the norm,
the norm and everything, like how many people like do you know who has been in domestically abusive situations? Because I know at least 4 firsthand off of the top of my head.
Yeah. So I don't know what to tell about this. Like literally I don't have words, because I'm just thinking like even when we were talking about the court case in the late 19th, 18th century, and after 200 years in Canada, the political situation happened, and it's not so far. It's like it's so near, right? The political situation happened. We had created change for sure. Like especially those amazing women. Oh, I'm so honored, like with those women who have worked in this country, but still it's so much to do with it.
Absolutely. Right? And I always think, we're always told, we learn very much in school that things used to be so bad and now they're so good. And we don't have to worry about it anymore.
We had a happy ending.
Yeah, a happy ending. And, you know, some things shock me to this day. Like, for example, in Canada, this is supposed to be, they advertise it as like a very progressive, like equal opportunity for sexes country, right? But like my own mother herself found out, I think it was like 4 years ago or so, that she had in full paid for like the down payment and the mortgage on our house, and she just found out 4 years ago that 15 years later her husband, my father, was put as the primary on the house records. But she in full paid for it. She signed all of the documentation. But when they found out, and this is like in my life, when the bank found out that there was, when the bank found out that there was a man, that there was a husband, he was put first as the primary of the house, even though he wasn't financially responsible for it at all. So even when you do have the means, who is considered the authority?
A daddy, male. It's always that. Yeah, even when you told about this, I was thinking also about, you know, the small things. When you look around, when we observe, we could find these all details. It's still around us. And like if it given a spark, it can ignite. Yeah, that's what I always believe.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's great, because I have had a little bit of a different mentality. I always thought that there are things that need to change and we need to change them. Like we need to take action to change them. But like my mother is a sociology professor, so I was learning pretty horrific things from a pretty young age. And honestly, like I was pretty pessimistic in my life. Like how much can we realistically do to change this, given the hundreds of thousands of years of like everything that's been wrong?
Yeah.
But I'm changing my mindset. We need to take little steps, one at a time.
At the end of the day, even though just imagine that we have came so far from where women with legal court cases where even the women were beaten, like even when they were like almost in the verge of dying, they survived. They created revolution. They created movement so far that right now as as a young woman in our 2024 we're not experiencing that because of it. So it does say that the activism, the spirit within these movements have created space for us. It's
and also nice. Like I don't want to cast into a negative light like the women of the past and all of the things that they were going through, that they were kind of helpless to it. They were not helpless. Like women, there was not necessarily widespread organized feminist action in the past.
But thank you for clearing that.
I just want to say like they were absolutely marginalized, absolutely oppressed, absolutely victimized, but they were doing everything within their power to protect themselves. Like in terms of, you know, of course, I think everyone knows that like up until very like recently, women were like basically at the disposal of their husbands, sexually speaking. There was no such thing as marital rape. Your husband can have sex with you whenever he wants, and that's legal. And it's not considered forced, even if he does force you. And so like the way that women of the past and still to this day would like kind of take their autonomy back, even if they can't legally do anything about it at the time, they would like instead, some of them would choose to live only with women. They would choose celibacy. They would never marry. They would learn like contraceptive alternative knowledge. So like, you know, how could they prevent a pregnancy from happening so that maybe you wouldn't be in a position to be dependent on your husband if you're pregnant, because it comes with a lot of vulnerabilities. So they would do everything that they could to try to prevent pregnancies. They would try natural and at-home birth controls, which could be dangerous sometimes, but also they could also work. They would also sometimes like assort to like abortion or like even infanticide, which is, you know, horrific. But you have as somebody who's basically a prisoner in your own home, like sometimes you have to do what you have to do to be safe and to survive. So I don't want them to come off as like passive victims, because they were always fighting from the beginning.
It's true. And they also had a knowledge and adaptability that just extended to these activisms and movements, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what it comes down to, is like we've always had the energy, we've always had like the space and the time. So I think that every little step that we take is anyway going to help our future generation. Like you can choose to be passive about it and just let things continue how they are, or you can do whatever you can within your power.
And I also want to mention that like till today, like when we consider the past, the present, what future, it's always about the choice.
Absolutely.
It's always about the choice. Like I remember that in Kerala there was a time where women were not able to cover their breast, especially the lower caste women. They were not able to cover their breast. There was a law. They were not allowed to cover their breast, and also they have to show to the upper caste men so that they could see as like this is a lower caste woman. And you know what, there's a story. It says that there are so many controversies about it. It says people say that this is real, but some say that this is not. It's about a woman who just cut off their breast for the protest of the banning of the breast. So, but at the same time, contradictory in today's present world, women is fighting for the way that they want to dress. Like it's their choice of like if they want to wear a crop top. It's always people see that it's more about sexualized view or objectified, but it's about how they want to dress. It's not about like on the basis of sexuality basis. I'm just like telling the story. It's because like in past, women have fought for that. Like for example, the cutting of the breast. She did that because she wanted to wear it. She wanted to cover her breast. And in today's world, women fight for the reason like they want to wear whatever they want. It's not because of how people perceive us. Like if I want to wear a bra, for example, in the public, I should have that freedom, and around me nobody should objectify me.
You should be able to be safe in your own body, in your own clothes.
Exactly.
It's all about
it's all about choice, right?
It's about the right to control yourself, regardless of what choice you make for yourself.
Yeah.
Having the ability to choose it, because like even in different parts of the world today, women are fighting for different things all the time, depending on their circumstances, like governmentally, politically, whatever. So some women are fighting for their right to take off of their clothes, like free the nipple. I can wear whatever I want. I can wear as little as I want, and I still deserve the right to be safe.
Yeah.
And other women in other places, like you mentioned before, are fighting for the right to conserve themselves. So, for example, there are women, for example, in like Iran, where they want to take off of their coverings. They want to like do whatever they want. They want to make the choice for themselves. And there are some women who are okay with it for sure.
Yeah.
But there's also women who just want to be able to make the choice for themselves and not be legally bound or have like legal repercussions for not covering themselves. I could totally give an example.
Yeah. Like for example, in this, it's just I have read about it. I have listened that many of in Indian women, especially Indian Muslim women, in some of the Indian, like I think it's even still here in Canada too, that if they are in a very public space, for example in university or maybe like in a very professional job, sometimes they're forced to not wear their cultural hijab, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah, they were forced to remove hijab because that they don't want them to identify like their ethnicity. But here it's about the questioning about the choice.
Exactly. So that's what actually like that's in perfect contrast to like what I was saying before.
Yeah.
Like depending on where you are, like some women are fighting to remove coverings. And for example, in Paris, you know, there's becoming a lot more in France, sorry, there's a lot of bans on like what religious coverings you're allowed to wear or not allowed to wear in public, at public beaches. So women there, especially Muslim women there, are fighting for their right to choose to conserve themselves and choose to cover what they want to cover, while other women are fighting to choose to not cover whatever they don't want to cover. And it all just comes down to the autonomy to choose for yourself.
It's all about choice. Yeah, we give a good number of good example of what choice is very important for women's right. That's what patriarchy is against, of choice. So I just want to like end our today's conversation with choice. And in our next podcast, we gotta talk about the justifications of why patriarchy is still holding on. And
like if it's so brutal,
yeah,
why have we been allowing this for so long? Why is it around? What is the root cause?
Yeah,
we're gonna talk about it next
time.
We'll
talk about next time. So thank you, Erin, for your wonderful knowledge and insights.
Thank you for this conversation. It was really lovely.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for
listening to us. So we will reach to you soon.
Yeah.
With the next episode. Thank you.